everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss. I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders, and thank you all so much for joining me for today's episode. So if you have a question for this question and answer-based podcast, go over to fearcastpodcast.com and send me a message over there at clicking on the submit a question link. You can go over to Instagram, which find me over at Instagram. Follow me. I sometimes post some cutesy things up there and some funny things and some alerts for, other podcast stuff. But I'm Fearcast Podcast over at the Instagrams. Feel free to send me a DM, click on the microphone button, record your podcast, because recording episodes, recording your voice, the audio of your voice goes to the tippity top of the list. Today's question is coming from the archives, so this was sent in a while ago. But again, I read all the questions, I see them, I hear them, I know they're there, and I will likely put it up on a future episode. So we're going to get on to that in just for just a moment, though. I just want to take a second to talk about the election. It happened. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, since I know that people listen to this podcast across the political spectrum. People listen to this podcast across the world and are probably sick and tired of American politics. And guess what? I'm here and I'm sick and tired of American politics. So this is what I'll say. To the people who are struggling, what I just want to remind everybody is just a couple of things. Is that number one, we need to practice tolerating uncertainty in these times. So we don't know what's going to happen. I kind of think about things as like a fork in the road. So first off, when we bring ourselves back to the here and now, we can focus on just what we have, what we can do, what we have control over, what we have agency over. And I would encourage all of you who are struggling in this to bring yourself back to the moment and find something that is enjoyable. Pour yourself into something interesting, desirable, fun, fantasy-wise. Take yourself out of, or not take yourself out of reality, but kind of engage with things that are amusing, fun, desirable, and meaningful to you. If it's aggravating, if it's frustrating, there's going to be plenty of room for that in life. For right now, find some time for peace and joy. So back to that idea of uncertainty. When we bring ourselves back to right now, nothing's happening. Generally speaking, not much is happening at the very least. Anxiety pulls us out of the moment and takes us way into the future, way into the past, or way into this anxiety fantasy land where anything is possible, any crazy thing can happen. So we need to remember that for right now, nothing's happening. We don't know what's going to happen. Great things could happen. Terrible things could happen, but we don't know. And I want you to remind yourself of that when your anxiety takes you away and gets the best of you. We don't know what's going to happen, and we'll wait. Now, certainly politically take action, certainly vote. We have certainly do what you can with the world that you can. But once you've done those things, we need to remember that we need to slow ourselves down and try to focus on that which we can and that which we find enjoyable and meaningful and all of that stuff. So it's going to be hard for a lot of people, and it's going to be hard, and it has many implications for many groups of people, types of people, and I fully recognize that they are worth fighting for. And we need to also take care of ourselves in order to have that conversation, in order to get through the hard times. So it is a balance. So I'm not saying just go out there and fight and go out there and listen as well, but also go inward and care for yourself, care for other people around you. And we are going to weather this storm. We are going to find our way through this. So I'm here with you on this. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of concerns, certainly, but we'll see how it goes. So I hope this doesn't get interpreted as let's suck it up and deal with it. I hope this doesn't get interpreted as like it doesn't matter and I'm fine the other side won or however it may be. It's that I don't know. I don't know, right? A lot could get done. A lot of nothing could get done. So we're going to have to see, and we're going to have to take those battles as they come. But taking care of ourselves in that process is my main focus of this. This is not a political podcast. This is a mental health and anxiety podcast. So that's what I'm trying to address here. So if you just hate my messaging today, feel free to unsubscribe. That's fine with me. If you hate it, send me hate messages and hate mail. For some reason, hate mail just brings me joy because it feels like I'm there, like I've arrived. Like if you send hate mail in, it's like, oh, I'm doing something. I don't know. It's a weird mindset to have. It doesn't feel great. I still then go like, oh my gosh, I am ruining people. It's the worst. But I try to let go of that thought very quickly. And it's a very mixed emotion. So anyways, that's what I have for you today. And you know what? We've got 4 years. We've survived 4 years before. We can survive 4 years again, and we're going to make it happen. So until then, I know that everybody listening to this also has a very complex life full of fun and joy and people and jobs and school and hobbies and anxiety. And that's what we're here to talk about. So I'm now going to shift over and I'm going to address a question from a listener. So this question comes from Candace. So I'll read Candace's question. So Candace asks, or says then asks, I suppose. She says, I've struggled with bodily obsessions and anxieties I could not make sense of for as long as I can remember. I've only recently learned that what I have is OCD. I'm currently working with a therapist to identify what my compulsions are, but so far it seems that I mostly use avoidance tactics. For example, avoiding foods when I've convinced myself I can't swallow properly and will choke on, not driving on certain roads that don't have a shoulder to pull over on because I fear that I might vomit at the wheel and have nowhere to stop, etc. One of the things that I struggle with the most is an extreme fear of blood, which causes me to experience intrusive thoughts about it. Since I have at times fainted at the sight of blood, this is tied to another fear of getting a horrible intrusive thought that causes me to faint at an embarrassing or even dangerous time. Parenthetically, she says, while at work or while at the wheel of my car. She goes on to say, my therapist has talked about using exposure therapy to work on this or to work through this, but the thought of exposing myself to gory imagery or to even a gory script sends me into a tearful panic because I fear that it will just provide my OCD brain with more ammunition to torment me with. I already make the point to not watch horror movies or medical shows to avoid feeding my wild imagination. And I'm literally terrified of being forced to look at or even discuss things of this nature. Do you have any advice or baby steps into exposure therapy for this type of OCD? Or is exposure therapy maybe not even suitable for this type of OCD? Thank you for any insight you can provide. All right. Candace, this is a great question. And this is also something that I have not addressed on this podcast in the past. So awesome. This works out great that we could have this conversation. I also, side note, I also realized that I'm not the best at planning things out. So this would have been a great episode to do just before Halloween, right? We're talking about blood and gory stuff and horror things and blah. Wouldn't that have been great? But alas, here I am a week later and an election later, and I'm talking about this. But you know what? There's also something beautiful about that. Your anxiety doesn't care what time of year it is, for the most part. It could be the worst possible time, and it goes, hey, Candace, think about this. That's kind of what it does. It doesn't care that it's the beginning of the month, so it's easy, and the end of the month is hard. It just pops up. It is random. It is uncomfortable, and that's how anxiety works. So that's how I'm going to justify it. I'm going to spin it to myself that way and make myself feel better. I suppose we can call this a compulsion, but I don't really care. That's just the way it's going to be, y'all. Sometimes I actually do plan it out, and it's crazy when it does happen. Anyhow. All right, so let's talk about this, Candace. So what I'll say about this is that there is a name for the thing that you're talking about. I know, it's crazy, but there's a name for what you got. And I'll also say this. I also had a question about this a while ago. One of my associates had a client who's also experiencing the same sort of thing. I forget the exact details of it now. But I asked the question. There's a network of other OCD therapists, and we ask questions to each other and give each other tips and advice and guidance. So I asked this question, not as on the nose as you did, but all of them were like, oh, yeah, well, it's this thing, obviously. And they all supported it. And my own insecurity is like, well, shouldn't I have known about this? Everybody seems to know about this but me. Here's the reality. Not everybody learns all the words all at once. And we all learn things slowly and carefully and one thing at a time. And that was my moment to learn about that, or to learn the name of this. And Candace, today is your time to learn the name of this too. So now, I'm going to say this, and I'll also say, go talk to your doctor about this, because it's something for them to officially diagnose. But from what you're talking about, it does sound like vasovagal syncope. Now, I'll say it again, vasovagal syncope. Now, I'm going to go into what this is, but ultimately what this is a bodily phenomenon in which you can be stressed, experiencing something suddenly, experiencing some physical sensations, and it results in fainting. Now, there is treatment for it. There are ways that you can work around this and help with this, some of which is indeed exposure and response prevention. But I want to talk a little bit about what it is, how it works, why it affects you the way that it does, and then give you some things to think about. So vasovagal syncope. So I'm going to read this that I found from Cedars-Sinai. I think this kind of summarizes kind of what this is. So it says, many nerves connect to your heart and blood vessels. These nerves help control the speed and force of your heartbeat. They also regulate blood pressure by controlling whether your blood vessels widen or tighten. So if they tighten, they're going to squeeze more blood through. When they widen, it's going to cause a drop in. I'm adding this. This is not from Cedars-Sinai. If they widen, it's going to drop in blood pressure. Like, think about a really big hose and then a really small hose. And if you're squeezing the same amount of fluid through it, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to take a lot more blood or a lot more liquid to get through the bigger pipe than the smaller pipe, right? And you only have a finite amount of blood. All right, let's keep going. So usually these nerves coordinate their actions so that you get enough blood to your brain, which is important. Under certain circumstances, these nerves might give an inappropriate signal. This might cause your blood vessels to open wide. At the same time, your heart rate may slow down. Blood can then pool in your legs, which leads to a drop in your blood pressure, and not enough of it may reach your brain. If this happens, you may briefly lose consciousness. When you fall or lie down, blood flow to your brain resumes, and then you wake up. All right, so that in a nutshell is kind of what is happening. So what can cause this type of response? Well, a lot of different things. So some things can include excessive heat, standing for long periods, intense pain, prolonged exercise, dehydration, and also intense emotions such as fear. And they also note the sight of blood or a needle are also a very common symptom to cause vasovagal syncope. As this happens, there can be some symptoms that you might start to notice before this happens. Now, in the bunch of articles I read about this, it kind of talks about that for the most part, there are going to be some symptoms that occur before you fully faint. And they gave the number of around 10 seconds. So these are some things that you might want to start to be aware of, but some common things can be nausea, turning pale, getting sweaty palms, blurred vision, feeling dizzy or lightheaded. So if these are some symptoms you start to experience, you can then take note of that and then practice quickly getting into or a different position or using some of these exercises that I'll talk about in a moment. Now, when somebody does faint, that unconsciousness can last for a relatively short amount of time. But I fully recognize that fear that if you are, driving, you probably don't want to faint. Once people regain consciousness, you can start to feel fatigued, exhausted, kind of just burnt out. Some people describe feeling nauseous, feeling like they want to vomit, or even feeling depressed afterwards. So these are kind of some common experiences that people have when having vasovagal syncope. Now, I mentioned going to the doctor, and not because this is something that is extremely bad or is tied to something else, but that they can formally diagnose this through a number of specific exercises, which I'm not going to, tests and things, just to make sure, just to show, illustrate that this is a thing that you're experiencing. So, go to your doctor, talk about them. One of the other reasons for that is that sometimes medication can be helpful in this process, and you might want to add that in to your regimen as you're moving forward with this. Okay, so what are some things that you can do about this? So, some initial things that you can do to help. I know I'm kind of eventually working up to your answer. I promise I'm going to get there. But you were talking about what are some baby steps you can do, and is exposure and response prevention helpful? So, I do want to answer that, because a lot of these other things that I'm about to talk about are part of the process. If you are one of the lucky people who experience vasovagal syncope, these are things that you might want to take into account and start to include in your life, as you never know when you're going to encounter blood or something related to it, or see needles or have those thoughts. And you want to be prepared for it, and prepare not only your behaviors, but also just prepare your body and mind. So, some things that articles suggest are just good hydration. So that can help to ward off fainting. I read something that talked about having a higher than normal salt intake, and presumably that would kind of raise your blood pressure slightly, which would then help your blood be able to get to your brain. Now, that being said, consult your doctor on this first before you do that sort of thing. All right. This I actually found interesting is adding compression stockings into your life. So what compression stockings are, they're like giant socks that can go up to your knees or perhaps even above that, as you can imagine, squeeze the heck out of your legs. And what that's going to do is it's going to force blood out of your legs and up into the rest of your body. Now, generally speaking, your legs are at the opposite end of your body from your brain. I think you all know that. So compression socks are going to push that blood away from your legs into your brain, presumably. But ultimately, it's not going to be perfect, but it's certainly going to help that blood from pooling in your legs and maintain a certain level of blood pressure. The other thing that it mentions is having counter pressure maneuvers. So now we're getting into some treatment aspects that we can do when we start to feel that sensation. Actually, I'll add before this, another thing is exercising regularly. So that can vary from person to person and what everybody's able and willing to do. But exercising regularly can help to maintain a healthy blood flow in your body. So incorporating that into your day, hydration, eating well can also help with this. So these are all, not magic tools, but these are all things to help create a body that can kind of not counteract this, I suppose, but can kind of weather this storm, and so that you're going to be able to address this when needed. All right. So what are some counter pressure maneuvers? So what these can do is you're thinking about trying to get blood from your legs up into your body, right? If your blood pressure is dropping and it's pooling in your legs, one thing that you can do then is if you start to feel this coming on, you can very quickly tense your legs, tense your abs. You can even cross your arms and squeeze your body. You can squeeze your fists. I read some people recommending holding and squeezing kind of squeeze balls or other kind of tension tools, really just to constrict all those blood vessels in your legs and arms and trying to push that back into your trunk and then up into your head as best it possibly can. Now, is this the magic tool? Also, no. But if you start to feel these sensations arising, using some of these exercises can be helpful to slow that process. Now, if you're capable or able to do this in a space, if you're at home or if you're in your therapist's office or wherever you might be, if you start to feel those initial sensations arising, getting into a lying position or going into kind of leaning, if you're seated, you can lean over and put your head between your legs. Having slow and steady breaths, practicing that body clenching exercise I just mentioned, all of that can again help to ensure that blood is going to get into your brain and help you to maintain consciousness. So all of that can be helpful, and all of that is predicated on you being aware of what those symptoms are that you start to know that you're starting to get this syncope occurring. Now, to that end, mindfulness and relaxation exercises can be really helpful. And this is kind of a broad recommendation, but what this is going to do is it's going to help to build your awareness of your body and awareness of your emotional state so that you can start to address those when they arise. You'll start to notice physical sensations more and kind of be more sensitive to the smaller feelings that will be red flags for you that perhaps you need to lie down, put your head between your legs, start your body tensing exercises. So all of that can be helpful. Furthermore, mindfulness can help you to regulate your stress response, right? Which also leads me to another recommendation. So CBT can be helpful in this. Now, obviously, I'm a CBT, ERP, ACT sort of dude, so I love CBT. So what this is going to help you to do is it's going to help you to challenge the negative beliefs and negative thought patterns that you do have about blood, about yourself, about your safety, about the world around you, about driving itself, right? Presumably with your therapist, you are already doing some CBT exercises. So great. But for someone else out there who's just thinking about this, working with a therapist and using some like alternative thought record exercises, looking at cognitive distortions, challenging some negative or irrational beliefs you have, or just skewed beliefs you have about yourself and your ability to handle anxiety or handle stress and tension, all of that can be helpful. Furthermore, CBT can help you to build better coping strategies to help reduce that fear, right? So some of it is, talking about what blood or needles mean to you, what these horror images feel like for you, or what are they associated with, right? What is the story your brain tells you about driving? What is the story your brain tells you about other aspects of your life that you're, let's see, I'm just kind of going through your email again. You were talking about like foods and worried that you might, you can't swallow properly and you're going to choke, right? So CBT can help you to challenge some of those beliefs, reflect back on your actual experiences with it, perhaps even reflect back on and process through experiences where, you may have choked, which may have contributed to this. I don't know. But CBT can be one of those things. Now, I did read a little bit that talked about using biofeedback, which can be helpful, but it's also some stuff that you're going to be able to get through good CBT and mindfulness work. Biofeedback is going to be a therapeutic technique in which they kind of put probes and whatnot on you, kind of detecting blood pressure, detecting heart rate, things of that nature on your body, and it's going to be connected to a visual screen. I guess visual screen, you don't have like an audible screen. Anyways, so connected to a TV, a screen of some type, and you'll be able to see what your body is doing. Now, I've heard some crazy things. I haven't done any biofeedback training or done it myself, but I've heard some folks who have gone through it, and there are some things that look like a video game, and in the process process of you practicing your slow and steady breaths, slowing your heartbeats, lowering your blood pressure through all of these, through other various exercises, you visually see what's happening. So you get that kind of reinforcement cycle, right? It's biofeedback. You're getting the feedback of what your body is doing. But through mindfulness exercises, you can also simply become aware of that. So ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's whatever you would prefer and what's going to feel right for you. So, all right. So where does exposure and response prevention fit into this? So there wasn't a whole lot that I read about exposure and response prevention for this. But that being said, I don't see why exposure and response prevention would not be applied to this. So I hear that you're talking about you don't watch horror movies, you don't watch medical shows because all of that freaks you out. Totally understandable. And avoidance is, by the way, I did read a bunch of articles that just said, hey, don't drive, don't watch horror movies, basically advising avoidance in life. Now, I understand that depending on the severity that you are experiencing this, perhaps it can be helpful for a time. And perhaps if it's so severe, driving may not be for you. But I don't know you and I don't know the situation that you're in, so I'm certainly not going to advise that. But I could absolutely see for someone who has an extreme case of this, that may be advisable. But for you, it sounds like you are able to drive. But we want to move into this slowly and steadily. Now, through exposure and response prevention, remember that we are doing two things. Exposure, so intentionally exposing yourself to a thought, a feeling, an image, a sensation, while practicing response prevention, which is resisting anything that would undermine or reduce the fear or control the feared outcome to it. Now, with the blood in your case, or for some people, needles, sometimes you're just going to have this vasovagal response to something, and there isn't necessarily a feared story, but it is a trigger that starts this nervous process. So, with the thought of blood, what we'd want to do in this case is to slowly and progressively work yourself towards things that are more triggering to you. So as we talked about with exposure, we want to start small. And for you, man, you may want to be talking with your therapist about going exceedingly slow. Now, I'll finish that sentence. Exceedingly slow, so that you can learn that you can have these thoughts and not faint, and that you can get used to those and show your nervous system, show your mind that these things aren't dangerous and that response is not necessary. Now, it's not like you asked for this response. It just kind of showed up, right? So we're going to slowly get to it. Now, one thing you may want to talk about with your therapist is practicing holding those thoughts while doing those body squeezing, and even lying down exercises. It may be helpful for you to do your exposure and response prevention in a laying down position, right? So most therapists have couches. It's kind of our iconic thing. So lay down on that couch. And then you can practice exposure and response prevention just simply by saying the word blood. And then practicing, you can experiment, maybe lying down and practicing saying blood and seeing if you start to feel some of those initial sensations. And if you don't, keep saying them, keep practicing, and then maybe move up. You may want to pair that with some of the body squeezing in a prone position, just to ensure that you are getting enough blood to your brain, and also just so you can practice those muscle skills. So you're literally developing muscle memory for when this happens in everyday life. Excuse me. So as you're working your way up, you're going to start with maybe saying blood. Maybe then, as you're in a prone position, writing the word blood. Maybe then you're going to be, saying blood or writing the word blood with a red crayon, right? You may then, after you do all of that, you may then ultimately move up to just simply sitting on the couch with your head up, your legs to the ground, and then starting from the beginning. Saying blood, thinking blood, writing the word blood, whatever it may be, and tolerating the sensations, building the awareness of those sensations that are the big red flags to it coming up, practicing tension as needed, and showing your brain that you can have these thoughts and that you've got a strategy. that you can handle it. And ultimately, through that process, step by step, you'd be moving up towards more uncomfortable imagery. Now, I hear what you're saying as well about you don't want to, you fear that by doing this, you're going to be giving your brain more ammunition to torment you with. And this is a balance. It's a balance for you. There's the eternal conversation about how extreme do we go in our exposure work. Well, that is up for interpretation, right? That's up for individual therapists and in conversations with individual clients that we're working with. For you, you may not be someone who requires or needs to intentionally flood themselves with intense material, especially if you don't like horror movies in the first place or don't have a desire to include horror movies or medical shows into your life. Now, that being said, if you are someone who says, I kind of want to watch those, I want to be able to watch those, or I used to love those and now I can't. So if that's the case, you will have to slowly start working that into your life. But I'm also here to say that, when we say, well, I don't want to give my brain more ammunition to torment you with, what you're also saying is these thoughts are dangerous and these thoughts are bad and I need to avoid them because if I have more of them, it's more dangerous. Through exposure and response prevention, through CBT and learning to tolerate these thoughts and feelings, we would also be saying, any thought that comes into my mind, any horror thought, any medical-related thought, any blood-related thought, fill in the blank, is an acceptable thought, is just a stimulus that can bounce between your ears. Because when you just say, do not have X thought, that's what you're going to think about. Don't have a gory thought. Probably as I said that, listeners to this podcast maybe have had, just then, a gory thought of whatever shape or form it took for you. Don't think about a white elephant. Whatever you do, do not think about a white elephant with the word blood written across the side of it. Right? How's that working out for everybody? We want to be able to open our brain to saying anything is acceptable. I don't have to like it, but I have to know that it's there and show myself I can handle this, I can get through this uncomfortable thought, and I can keep living my life. And for you, you may need to have the strategies of the clenching activities, being able to quickly lie down, being able to take that into account as you are living your day. And it may be for driving, you have those compression socks on as a backup, just in case. If it is that sort of case that you can faint while driving. Now, you didn't say you have fainted while driving. You say there's a fear of driving or a fear of fainting while driving or fear of fainting at work, right? So perhaps in order to get you back to driving, it may be that you wear those compression socks and that you practice just doing those exposure exercises in your car while parked. And then you practice them driving around a parking lot with your therapist, either in the car or out of the car, however it is, driving slowly or with a family member in the car, driving slowly and then having an audio script play where it just says blood or gore or cut or bleed or whatever it might be as you drive, and then practicing those exercises and then having someone there to be able to grab the wheel in case something crazy happens. And then seeing how that goes. So there are a lot of ways you can approach this, and I'd encourage you to just have these very open and candid conversations with your therapist and with family members if that's who you may want to incorporate into this. But to answer your question, there is a slow and steady way that you can approach this, and I don't think it's completely unheard of or unrealistic that you can practice this. So, all right, Candace. I'll let you go here. So thank you so much for this question. This has been a great question. Hopefully I did it justice. At the tail end, I'll also just add, this is something that, some statistics about this. This is something that usually occurs in people who are kind of younger folks or teens. Generally speaking, it doesn't affect kind of the older population for whatever reason, but it certainly can. It can affect both men and women pretty evenly. So, it's not like there's something super weird about you. It's that's part of your makeup, and that's okay. And we don't need to bemoan or begrudge our genetic makeup. We just accommodate it and we work with it. So, all right, Candace, I'll leave you with that. So thank you so much for that question, and best of luck in your process. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.